I would like to introduce Greg Core, the Division Director with the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Office of Special Education Programs. Greg?
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm so glad that you could join us for this special TA call. You know, we normally hold these on the second Thursday of each month, but we have this special one scheduled just to roll out our new differentiated monitoring system. We call it DMS 2.0. And Lori Vanderplu, who was on, will give you some more detail about the background that led up to the development of this this version of DMS, so I won't steal any of her thunder. I do want to say that this is something that we've been working on here in OSEP for about a year, analyzing our previous system and determining what improvements could be made to make it more effective for us and for you, but especially for the kids and families that we all serve. With me today is Matt Schneer, who's one of our team leaders, but who has also spearheaded this effort to develop DMS 2.0, and Diana Yu, who has been right there at Matt's side and provided tremendous assistance as we have worked through this process. A big hats off to various MSIP staff members who have been involved in this work. We have put together an ad hoc team late in 2019 and earlier this year to begin this process, and more recently have established a standing DMS team, recognizing that this work will be ongoing and needs our attention. So I want to thank everyone who has been and continues to be involved in that process. So without further ado, I'm then going to turn our call over to our OSEP Director, Lori Vanderplu. Lori?
Yes, oops, thank you, Greg. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm so excited to be able to be with you to roll out this new information. So if we could move to the next slide, please. There we go. So just a little of historic perspective on this. When I first came to OSEP, I kind of walked right into the beginning of the whole rethink process. And so I did have the distinct opportunity to facilitate 16 or 18 listening sessions with all of our key stakeholders across the nation in relationship to the SPP APR determinations and certainly our DMS process. And we took that feedback very, very seriously as we looked at making some changes to continuously improve our system, but particularly around the DMS. Also had an opportunity to attend the NASD General Business Meeting and have conversations with the General Board. You know, Greg and I had an opportunity to present some information with the NASD Board last fall in relationship to some of our preliminary thoughts with this. And so we took your feedback very seriously into consideration as we were looking at where did we need to make some improvements in our system to make sure that we were doing the right work. And so we really do want to ensure that, you know, OSEP in particular is fulfilling our responsibilities, you know, to monitor the states, but in the same breath, understanding that the states use our model as they're looking at monitoring their LEAs. And so how can we improve the whole continuum of the DMS process? Aligning our results and compliance. And, you know, when I first started here too in these conversations, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, 50-50, 50% on compliance and 50% on results. And we really, really wanted to put a little bit higher level of emphasis on the results aspect of it. When we look at our results data for students with disabilities across the nation, we know that we have some work to do, and you know, we wanted to look at how do we analyze our systems a little bit more effectively to really be able to make the change that needs to take place on behalf of our students. One piece that was important for myself too is just to be able to be very transparent with the information that goes out to the public, and we feel that this process is certainly going to provide an opportunity for that. And I know the rest of the team will share information that will show you that process. Provide differentiated, meaningful support and technical assistance to the states. This was really important for us to not just look at where there were of concern, emerging issues, or risk factors. That was the reason that we wanted to go into, or that we went into the states. We really want to be able to go in and provide some great technical assistance support to look at some areas that need improvement. But I also would love an opportunity for us to really validate the great things that many of our states are doing across the nation as it relates to their DMS model. So looking at creating a balance of needing improvement as well as validation of some really great effective practices that are taking place. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the DMS. I know I mentioned about focusing in on improved outcomes and results for our infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities in conjunction with compliance. And so we do want to have some extended conversations as we're working with you, over the next few years with implementation of this DMS 2.0, with how we can increase our focus and improve our focus on improving outcomes for our children. And so I'm really excited about engaging in more conversation with you about that. OSEP is having a lot of internal deliberative conversations around it. You're going to see a little later on in the slides too about our defined components. We've got 8 components that you may be very familiar with that will be the focus, and Matt and the team will give much more detail around that in just a few minutes. It's very important for me that we've got some integrated cross-component work taking place. So when we're looking at the SPP, what is our data really telling us? And so really looking at some of the 8 components and how we're crossing over and really analyzing our system a little bit more effectively. And then we will always take a look at where we have states' emerging needs that OSEP would need to take into consideration, even outside of the normal DMS process. But it'll still provide OSEP an opportunity to identify those needs and provide the right amount of support. So I'm really excited about the OSEP team and the work that they've done with this DMS 2.0 and the rollout of this model today. And so I am going to stop there and turn it over to the staff to share all of the details and the information. But again, thank you for attending.
Thank you so much, Lori. This is Greg again, and I think I'm up next. I wanted to mention that we will have an opportunity for you to ask a few questions at the end of the presentation. You can also enter questions into the chat, and we'll try to take as many of those as we can, but for any that we don't, we'll be following up with you. And I really want to encourage you to ask questions because I think that makes us better. It makes us really think through this process much more thoroughly. We've done quite a bit already and really incorporated a lot of feedback, but that's not to say that there may be some additional considerations that we should be making as we go forward. So real quickly, just some background. 4 or 5 years ago, we instituted a risk-based monitoring system. The uniform guidance came out about that time, which required that we, as well as our grantees, use a risk-based system to monitor with a program effectiveness. So taking that to heart, we used a, taking that to heart from the uniform guidance, we developed a risk-based system across 4 different areas, identifying risk factors for states. We used this process then to develop a risk score for each state, and then used that as a selection criteria. And although that system had its merits, one of the downsides of it is that we continued to select the same or similar groups of states for monitoring, but there were a number of states that were not coming up for monitoring. And, for a good number of states, it had been quite a few years. And we didn't think that that was optimal. we thought we should develop a system that ultimately would touch every state. So you'll see as we unveil DMS 2.0 that the new system will do that. So instead of using this risk-based system for selection, we're incorporating risk as one of the components that we use when we differentiate among states, but not as a selection criteria. Instead, we will be using a cyclical monitoring process to ensure that we fulfill all of our monitoring responsibilities. So that's just a little bit of background. I'm going to turn the call over to Matt Schneer then, who is going to walk us through DMS 2.0.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you all for your attention. If you indulge me for a minute, I just want to add to some remarks that Greg made and make some acknowledgments and thank yous. First of all, I really want to thank Lori for her support in moving towards, and Jennifer, we can go to the next slide, thank you. Moving towards DMS 2.0 and all the support that she has given us, as well as the support of our Assistant Secretary, Mark Schultz. I also want to note that Greg mentioned that Diana has been working with me, and I would not say that she's been assisting me. I would say that she's my partner in all of this, and I really appreciate all the tremendous work that she's done. And the DMS implementation team that just started this summer has been integral to the work that we've been doing, but we also relied upon several iterations of kind of ad hoc groups around DMS over the years. So thank you to all in MSIP who have contributed to where we are, because we think this is going to take us to a much better place in terms of fulfilling our responsibilities to ensure that all kids are getting what they want, improving results for kids with disabilities. So I also want to thank our colleagues in Research to Practice, particularly some of the project officers, as well as some of the TA centers, who we've been able to preview some of these ideas with and talk about some of the things they're doing. And we're really looking to align some of the technical assistance they're providing, some of the products that they're doing to what we're doing here. And we'll be having ongoing conversations around that. So turning to this slide, this outlines the major components of DMS 2.0, which I'll go through very briefly right now, and then we'll go through in more detail as we go through some of these cycles. So as Greg mentioned, we are moving to a 5-year cycle. All states will be have the monitoring process start within a 5-year cycle. We'll talk more about that. The resources, what we do want to ensure is that we reserve resources within OSEP to address any issues that are coming up within states that we need to address on a more immediate basis rather than on cycles. So we will be able to continue to do that. The third part, and we'll be talking a lot about this is a new portion of our monitoring system, is we're developing we're introducing 3-phase approach to monitoring. Year 1 is what we might call pre-site and preparation or discovery. Year 2 is the focused monitoring that will be we would normally do during our monitoring. And year 3 is for post-visit correction, technical assistance, work on improvement. Talk more about that in a moment. The fourth column here, general supervision, notes the focus that we're taking throughout the monitoring process that we're talking about. We want to focus on the state's systems for general supervision, and in a way that it goes beyond the traditional, if those of you who've been around for a while, what we did in verification of looking at identification and correction of noncompliance, while that is certainly an important part of it, we are really looking to align our thoughts around results and compliance and states are working with their local programs to not only ensure that they're meeting the requirements of IDA and the regulations of IDA, but also working to improve results for kids with disabilities. And then the last piece of this slide is that we're going to continue to differentiate. As Greg mentioned, we are not going to use our risk assessment to select what states we are monitoring in a given year. Rather, we're going to use risk assessments as well as additional information we gain, particularly in the first year or phase of monitoring to determine where we need to focus our attention on the monitoring, what it's going to look like, what we're going to delve into more deeply. Okay, next slide, please. So 5-year cycle, we have come to believe that it's extremely important that we make sure we are touching in a significant way all of our states within a reasonable amount of time, and we've come to the idea that that should be no more than 5 years. As Greg mentioned, there are states, and I think Lori mentioned as well, that we haven't had significant monitoring activities with for quite a while. That doesn't mean that they're doing things wrong, but it means that we don't understand enough about what's going on in that state, and we believe we have an obligation to make sure we're touching in those states in a significant amount of time all states within this 5-year time. So we really believe that that's important, and our assistant secretary and our administration has been helping us with that and allowing us to make sure we have sufficient staff to be able to do that. In addition, in developing the 5-year cycle, unlike what we've been doing in the previous iteration of DMS, we are, for the most part, going to monitor both Part B and Part C programs in a given state in the same year. There will be a few exceptions, but generally we'll be doing them in parallel during the same year. We think this is a better use of our resources and better way of looking at what's going on in the state, particularly when we think about some of the connections around transition and other types of issues like that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what you have here on this slide demonstrates what this is going to look like in terms of a monitoring cycle. We'll be talking about what the cohorts mean, but they align to the notion of having 3 years or 3 phases of monitoring. So although we will be beginning the monitoring process starting in October with the states that are selected for cohort 1, that the completion of all of that monitoring for those states in cohort 1 will be not until year 3, and you can see how it works out that our work continues to grow as we will have multiple states in different phases throughout the years. It does mean that those states that are selected for cohort 5 in year 5, their monitoring will actually not be completed for a couple of years, but that's the cycle that we have. And let me just also mention, in terms of the population of the cycle, the way we are populating the cycle is we are giving priority to those states who have not been monitored for a significant amount of time, trying to, as I said, do both B and C together. The identification or being put into a particular year or a particular cohort does not identify any particular risk. It just identifies the year that we are going to start monitoring you for, and to the extent that we could, years 1 and years 2 are those states that we have not touched for quite some time. One of the things that we're going to be working on and hopefully providing you in the near future is some additional information, talking points, or frequently asked questions about how all of this works, particularly so that when you get questions from your chief state school officer or your lead agency director, you're able to answer what it means to be in cohort 1, why you're there, what this is going to look like. So please look forward to additional information coming out in the near future. We will be, in addition, contacting very shortly those states that have been identified to be in cohort 1 and cohort 2, year 1 and year 2, to let them know about that. And once we notify them, we will release those first 2 years to the field so everybody knows who will be monitoring for those first 2 years. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. This just makes it bigger. Okay, so I've mentioned this concept of 3 phases of monitoring. And this slide gives you a general picture of it. The year 1, we'll talk about each of these in more detail in the subsequent slides. Year 1 is meant as a pre-site work preparation or discovery, where we can learn as much as we can about the state. to determine how we want to focus our monitoring moving forward into year 2. Initially, this slide said on-site monitoring because we envisioned year 2 to take place on-site, but in acknowledgement of the uncertainty of the times we're living in, we want to acknowledge that it's possible that it will be virtual because we don't know what it's going to be like in terms of travel at that point. But that's going to be the real focus time year of monitoring that will result in a letter describing any areas for improvement, required actions, calling out best practices, other things along those lines. And then year 3 is the post-monitoring correction and technical assistance year, where we're going to be working with the states to move on from there. So let's talk about each of these years in a little bit more detail. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, year 1 is a preparation year. In this year, what we will be doing is the state lead will be leading the activities, consulting with other members in MSIP to prepare for the monitoring activities. And we'll do this through a number of means. We're going to have universal TA available to all states, not just the states that are selected for cohorts 1 and 2. This is going to include the protocols that we will be using, various types of OSEP guidance and TA center guidance that we will be making available and calling your attention to on the areas that we're looking at. We also will be doing some select requests for documents related to our protocols, and we'll certainly be reviewing all the publicly available information that we already have through your SPP APRs, through your grant applications, through your websites, and a variety of other means. And then we will be scheduling targeted interviews with state staff, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like as we move forward from there. So that's the year 1 where we're really collecting some information about the state. Then we can move into the next slide. This is year 2. This is our core monitoring year. So based on the information that we collect during the first year, we will be developing an agenda in collaboration with the state for the monitoring activities that where we really want to focus on the issues that require further exploration. We need more details. We want to see what it looks like in terms of implementation at the state and or the local level, and additional discussions to try to really hone in on those areas that need greater attention. And I think while there'll be differentiation throughout the process, this is the year where you'll see the most differentiation as we design the monitoring activities to fit the needs of that state specifically. Okay, next slide, please. So the third year, we have realized over the last number of years that monitoring doesn't end when we get the letter out. That we need to spend considerable amount of time with the states that we've monitored to help them make sure that they can implement any required actions that we have stipulated, help them develop improvement plans to address any kinds of areas that they need for improvement. So we wanted to really call this out as a specific part of our work process in calling for a year 3 around correction and technical assistance. Right, next slide, please. So this slide really tries to focus in on what we saw the benefits to this approach, of phased monitoring. One of the things that we really want to emphasize is that phase 1 is an opportunity not only for us in OSEP or MSIP to learn about the states, but it also offers the states the benefit to think deeply about their systems, look at the materials that we're providing through Universal TA and any questions that we have. It may provide an opportunity for them to do some self-correction or pre-finding correction on areas that they realize need some work or other types of things. So we think that this will be of great benefit. Having that second year, phase 2, where we have, based on the information we've already collected and the questions we've asked, we will really be able to delve into those things that we think are most important, will have the most impact on students with disabilities, infants and toddlers with disabilities, and allow us to see how state systems are working at a local level. Again, we will not be obviously monitoring the local programs, but understanding how state systems are manifesting themselves at the local level is a key thing to understanding how state systems work. And as I mentioned, phase 3, we think this is crucial to allow sufficient time to ensure correction, provide the support that states will need to get to where they want to be and where we hope they need to be at the same time. Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. And from here, I am going to hand it over to my colleague, Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for a second National TA call this month. And my name is Diana Yu. And if you wouldn't mind clicking on the animation, please. Perfect. So hopefully this graphic looks very familiar to you. I hope you won't be alarmed by the shortened titles. These are the 8 components of the general supervision system that you're probably very familiar with. We've just shortened the names to prettily fit on the puzzle pieces, but we have not changed what the components are, so don't want people to be alarmed. We hope that you'll find from our presentation today that our approach is taking what we've learned about these areas in the past to help drive the improving results and functional outcomes for children with disabilities to the next level. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we have developed a framework for each of the puzzle pieces. We have created if, then statements that all drive to the same intended results, which is improving outcomes for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities. We further defined each of the puzzle pieces, but today I'm going to preview just one, which is the technical assistance and professional development one. We will share the entire framework that has those definitions and the if, then statements shortly, but today we'll just preview this area. Next slide, please. So just so that you can see it better, we've broken it out to 2 then statements at a time. But in this area, we're stating that if a state has an effective system of targeted technical assistance and professional development, what does that look like? Well, the definition that we have mapped to this is that the system is designed to respond to data-informed root cause analysis of areas in need of improvement and activities that the state wants to continuously support. And so sustainability is a major target there. So then, if the state is able to use the data and information for the areas that are in need of improvement, what would we look for? So some evidence, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but these are some that we would probably want to see. We'd want to see any tools or mechanisms to collect that data that would inform that targeted technical assistance area. Any data used to identify those potential activities to attend to those areas. We'd want to see the frequency of analysis of data. Do you look at it on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis? Is that appropriate and why? We also want to look at evidence of stakeholder engagement for that first then statement. Then to probe deeper, the state should then identify technical assistance and professional development offerings that are aligned to those areas in need of improvement. So here for the evidence, we want to get past sign-in sheets or those kind of rosters, attendance sheets. We want to look at examples of dissemination and communication of the available TA. Is it made available to all your locals and early intervention services providers or only targeted areas, and why? And what was the stakeholder involvement in identifying those areas or those activities in developing the plan for that the offerings, excuse me. Next slide, please. The next then statement is that the state will then prioritize the delivery of that TA and professional development in those areas that have the highest level of need. So being, again, that emerging issues that we talked about earlier, but targeting those areas and also providing support to the areas that have the highest level of need. And so we'll look for examples of statewide practices. Maybe something is already in existence and this additional TA opportunity is tagged onto that, or how you probe different methods of delivery, especially being creative in the time that we're in right now. We'll look for descriptions in the introductory paragraphs in your SPP APRs. And the alignment with other programs such as your SPDIG or any other state initiatives or local initiatives that are going on. Again, stakeholder engagement. So you'll see some patterns and themes here that we're going for. And then the final then statement is that the state will then evaluate the fidelity of implementation of the delivery of that TA. So examples that we look for again here are the quality of the professional development used with fidelity, any links to the OSEP or the narrative, again, back to the APR, and the evaluation of the effectiveness of the TA that was delivered. And again, then we would get to the ultimate intended result of improving outcomes for infants, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. Next slide, please. So when we put all the components of the general supervision system together, it brings us back to results-driven accountability, which is the premise, one of the three, and DMS is one of the three prongs of RDA. So it brings us right back home to RDA. Next slide, please. So as Matt mentioned, we're taking a 3-year phased approach. And so in phase 1, we want to take time to have really intentional conversations. But how do we get through 8 components? And so we've put together a proposed schedule of activities for those states who are identified for each cohort. And so this is not a rigid schedule by any means. And again, we will be adaptive to a state's needs. So if we need to talk about dispute resolution in October, well, then that conversation should happen when it should. Otherwise, we thought about, how would we get a really good understanding of a state's general supervision system? So we thought about starting with the 3 initial components of fiscal management, integrated monitoring activities, and then improvement sanctions and that puzzle piece. And we thought it would probably take a good 2 months, maybe a little bit longer to have that conversation. And then from December to January, when everyone is preparing for the SPP APR submission, talk about your data systems and the actual SPP APR. You'll notice an intentional break in February. That's intended because the APR submission will be here, but also a little bit of catch-up time if any conversations take a little bit longer. Those 5 topics are very heavy-hitting, so they might not cleanly break at the end of 2 months, so there's a little bit of room in the schedule. Then pick it back up in March and April to talk about the implementations of policies and procedures. We thought that would map very well as you prepare for your grant application submissions. Also, technical assistance and professional development. We delved a little deeper into that topic in particular today. And then from June to July, we thought dispute resolution has a lot of components. Even if it's one topic, we thought that we needed to spend a lot of time on it. And so for 2 months, from June to July, we thought dispute resolution would be a good topic to discuss. And then so to close out that year, the final 2 months of August and September of that fiscal year, would be to prepare to transition into phase 2 when the actual monitoring activities would take place. So parallel to this process, of the actual phase 1 activities is universal technical assistance. And so as any tools or resources are identified or developed, they will be posted on our IDA website that we showcased on the first August National TA call. So if you didn't get a chance to participate, that recording is posted on our new website on the Ideas.workspace. So please access that. But we will provide universal TA by not only posting those tools and resources, but as we have calls with states identified in any cohort, those conversations would be made available to everyone. So to follow up our next steps, as Matt mentioned previously, we will be notifying those states who have been identified for cohorts 1 and 2 very shortly. We tend to individually reach out to them first and then make that notification available to everyone, and also support that announcement with some talking points. Thank you to our TA centers who suggested that great idea. So we will be reaching out to you shortly with that information. Additionally, certainly we'll take questions in just a moment as well, but if you need more time to think about this, and as other questions come up as you access the PowerPoint or go back to this recording after this conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out to your state leads with any questions, and they will funnel the questions to our DMS implementation team or to Greg, Matt, or myself, and we will try to respond to them very quickly. So thank you again for your time this morning, and I do want to, this afternoon, and I do want to open it up to questions, so you can enter them in the question pod. Thanks, Jennifer. Great, there are a lot of questions. The first one is on how to access the webinar series. So they will all be posted on the Ideas That Work website that we mentioned previously. It was also linked on the reminder to this call, and immediately after this presentation, when you get the thank you email for participating, that link will also be there as well. So there is a question, how is the APR and OSEP part of the monitoring process? So I think that would be in two ways. They are puzzle pieces. The SPP APR is actually one of the puzzle pieces, but we will look at all available data as appropriate to delve deeper into each component of the general supervision system. So since the OSEP in particular is part of the APR, that is how that will be incorporated.
And Diane, if I could just add, this is Matt. I think one of the things that we really want to be able to use this monitoring system, DMS 2.0, to do is to delve a little bit deeper, particularly with some of the APR indicators, to understand what's behind the data and to look at it in a deeper way. So it will be definitely an integral part of our process, as will the OSEP and how that fits into the overall system for ensuring improvement.
The next question is a very long one, so maybe I'll read it and then Matt, you can respond.
Oh, thanks.
There's a comment first. Love the relationship building and supportiveness of the new DMS, the actionable shift from what's wrong to how can we work together to make things stronger for children and families from the beginning. This will be revolutionary in our work together for children and families. Could you please share information about ways you have been rethinking the DMS process around equity, proactive responsiveness toward all current and future state systems to help us change the story from children and families from an equity core lens? For example, has there been any discussion about how equity could be an integral part of each phase of the monitoring in a way that states know it is a supported OSEP priority and not a check-in-the-box priority, but a supported and encouraged part of the work altogether?
So I'll try to start an answer to this. So first of all, I want to thank you for the nice comment at the beginning. We too think this will be really important for the field. Your question is a really deep and important question that we are continuing to work with. I think I would say both in terms of equity and sort of the elephant in the room about how we states and local systems and us are addressing pandemic. We are looking for ways to integrate discussions around those issues into each part of our monitoring, and that we think that the opportunity to have these conversations with states that are part of each of the cohorts in an individualized way will give us an opportunity to really start delving into what this means, to try to care about equity and learn from states and try to take that and then use it to provide suggestions and technical assistance and support to all states. And in a similar way, we want to try to use this opportunity to really work with states as they address the challenges that we're all facing in this unprecedented situation of addressing a pandemic and the ongoing uncertainty that we're dealing with through that. So that's a beginning of the answer. I don't think we have all the answers worked out, but that's a start. I don't know if anybody else from OSEP would like to add to that.
No, this is Greg, I just want to piggyback on Matt's comment that is an excellent question. You know, we have started the conversation here in OSEP, as I'm sure you have in your states. If you have suggestions or examples about how you're approaching this topic, we would be very excited to hear those. So please send those forward to us.
Thank you, Matt and Greg. The next question asks, can the resources include some examples of frequency of data analysis, such as quarterly as referenced during the presentation?
So I think that some of this will become a little bit clearer as we provide some additional information on what's expected during the phase 1 monitoring. I'm not quite sure if you're asking about the frequency of data analysis that you are doing with your local programs, or whether it's a data analysis that we're doing. Certainly one of the things that we'll be looking at when we talk to states is trying to understand how they analyze the data that they have and utilize it to drive improvement. And so that will be a big part of our process moving forward. Diana, did you have anything else you would want to add to that?
No, I think you answered it. Thank you. The next question asks, will you share the framework and its components for each area of the puzzle pieces?
So we do intend to to share the framework. We're finalizing a few pieces of it, but we do intend to share the framework with you in the near future.
And then the next question is, do you have a list of states for each cohort of monitoring?
And so as we mentioned, our intention is to first contact the states that are identified for the first 2 cohorts of monitoring, and then we will release those 2 cohorts. We made the decision that there may be reasons to make some changes in the future, so we're not going to release the subsequent cohorts at this time, but we will make sure that states are informed with plenty of time moving forward.
Thank you. The next question is, can you please give examples of the staff that will be included in the state interview process?
So I assume that you're talking about staff from the states. In terms of staff from MSIP, it will be your state leads and appropriate people to support them in different roles and potentially the team leader. But in terms of who's going to be involved in the state interview process, I think the general answer to that question is that you should plan to have anybody involved that has the relevant information needed to answer the questions that we're asking. And because we're going to be making the protocols available, we're going to try to make this as transparent as possible. We hope that that will be pretty self-evident. So if you're talking about fiscal monitoring, you will want to make sure the people that are responsible for fiscal monitoring are there. If you're talking about data collection, you want your data manager there and any other staff that might be there, so that the right people are there to answer the questions. It also, I mean, this is going to be a collaborative process. Your state lead will be working with you very closely to talk you through it and figure out what makes the most sense for your states moving forward.
Thank you. The next question is, would you please clarify the statement? OSEP won't use risk assessments to pick the states, but use information from the risk assessment. Might have misunderstood the comment.
Well, I apologize if I was unclear, so let me try to clarify that. I'm sure I misspoke a little bit. What we're saying here is that under the prior system of DMS, we had risk assessments in the different areas. We had results, we had compliance, we had fiscal, and we had the OSEP, and you got levels of engagement and notices around those for each of those areas, and depending upon your level of engagement, determined whether or not you were monitored that year. We're not doing that this year. We're not using a risk assessment to determine who we are monitoring. Instead, we will still be doing risk assessments, which will we use in conjunction with the information that we collect during this first phase to determine what is the content or the areas of monitoring that we need to focus in most when we get to that phase 2 of monitoring. So we will use the risk assessment to differentiate our monitoring, but not to select states for and determine who is being monitored at a particular time.
Thank you. The next question is, has OSEP updated TA resources for general supervision systems?
So, first of all, we think that some of the resources that we're going to be sharing as a result of this presentation will be a start towards that. Again, the protocols that we'll be using will be made available, and that will be TA resources. We're also very excited because a number of the resources that have been developed over the last year or two by our TA partners that are funded by OSEP really align well with what we're doing. So we think those resources that the TA centers have around general supervision and what it means to be looking at results through general supervision as well as other things will be very useful to the field moving forward.
Thank you. The next question is, in which month and year do you plan to launch the first cohort phase 1?
So it looks like there's actually one question right above that, Diana. How has, I think that's COVID-19 impacted rollout? So let me try.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me just address that one quickly. So first of all, we were intending to do this rollout at the end of April, and when the pandemic hit, we realized that that was not where you wanted to have your attention at that time. So we did delay this rollout. And then we had a lot of discussions about what we should do with implementing DMS 2.0. And I think in terms of the impact on what we're going to be doing, we really, as I mentioned, need to figure out, we will be working to integrate discussions around COVID-19, recovery from the pandemic, addressing issues around the pandemic into the issues that we address certainly through phase 1 and probably through phase 2 as well. And then in terms of the next question, so first cohort, phase 1 is being launched this coming October 2020. So I think that
Great, thank you. As a follow-up. Oh, go ahead.
No, so go ahead.
Oh, as a follow-up, which school year will be year 1?
So again, I think it answers the same question. We are starting in this coming October, which is our new fiscal year. So it'll be your school year 2020-21. But we will, when we look at information, we usually look at information related to the current year as well as a year or two before that.
Thank you. Next comment is, our state is waiting for OSEP to close findings from a 2016 onsite. How do we fit into the cohorts?
So I think that's something that you should probably address through your state lead. We are working hard to, first of all, issue all the remaining DMS letters from this last year and close out any ongoing findings. Once we release the first 2 cohorts, you can see where you are there, but you can also talk to your state lead about closing the existing findings that are there.
Thank you. And the next one is a comment. As the person who works on data and SPP, having to address these areas while pulling together data for the SPP is not great timing.
So I think we recognize this, and it's very difficult to come up with the best time to do this. We know that this puts a burden on everybody, and so the best thing we can do is to offer to be as flexible as possible in addressing the timing and making adjustments as needed. We are hoping that while there will be time involved, that the burden in the phase 1 will not be overly burdensome and that we'll be able to address it. And any concerns that you have, I again would suggest that you work with your state lead so we can address them moving forward.
Thank you. The next question is, the timeline shows a break in February for OSEP to review APRs. But what about states that are very busy developing their APRs in December and January and would also have to provide documentation and participate in monitoring at the same time?
So I think this is really the same issue. We will try to be as flexible as possible and make adjustments to meet your needs as well as our needs, but we do need to find a way to collect this information. The schedule that we put forward, as Diana mentioned, is meant as a guide. We thought that it would be really useful for both OSEP staff and state staff if we're addressing the same issues around the same time across the states. That will allow us to align the universal TA that we're providing, allow our staff to share notes and help each other with this, and help you think about things together and work with your TA centers. But it is a guide. It is not written in stone, so we'll make adjustments as needed.
Thank you. The next question is, how will states be notified and when?
So again, what we're going to do is very shortly, we will be contacting directly the states that are going to be in phase 1 and phase 2. Once they've received the notification, we will then make available the full list of states that are in cohort 1 and 2.
Thank you. The next question is, would it be OSEP's recommendations that states also move to cyclical monitoring for monitoring LEAs and continue to use a risk-based model for district selection?
So I think the way I would answer this is that states have a great deal of discretion to determine the best monitoring system to meet their needs. And there is, as Greg suggested, a great deal to be said for using a risk-based basis for making your selections and to focus the use of your resources. However, we do think that one thing that states should be paying attention to is, whatever system they're using, is the length of time between having significant contact with their with their districts or local programs to make sure that they find a way to ensure that they are addressing those issues within a timely fashion. So there is no one right way to do this. This is the way that we've come up with for now, but we do think that thinking about ways to make sure that your local programs aren't being missed for a long period of time is one of the considerations that you would want to use.
Thank you. The next question is, will OSEP request additional data from states outside of the SPP APR?
Well, we will be making document requests related to each of the different frameworks. Those may be things like policies and procedures, samples of monitoring, or other things like that. It's possible that in order to do a deeper dive into data, we might ask what additional data you might have on something. But again, this will be differentiated based on the states.
This is Greg. Let me just kind of add to that, because there have been iterations of this question in the last couple of minutes. And, you know, for the most part, we will be relying on data sets that already exist. I won't say absolutely never, but I can't imagine a scenario where we would ask a state to develop a whole new data set. I think in our conversations with you, we would be asking what data you have available, and if it's relevant to our inquiry, whether or not we could have access to it. The other thing is that, in this digital age, particularly now that many of us are teleworking, pretty much everything is available electronically. So I think that makes the exchange of information back and forth much easier. So it would be more a matter of, the state letting us know where we can access policies and procedures, for instance, on their websites, rather than having you develop things that you have to submit to us. So I think that should ease the flow of documentation between our office and yours.
Thank you, Greg, for that clarification. I think that's important. I would also add that the first thing we will do is look at the data we already have, the information we already have, as well as looking at your own website to see what we can discover before making a request to you.
Thank you. The next question is there a plan or loop by which promising practices you find in a state might be disseminated out to other states?
I don't think we've developed a specific plan for that. I think that's something that we will need to think about the best way of highlighting some of that as well. Certainly TA centers are a great way to do that, but we will think about that as we move forward.
There's a couple of repeat questions about the schedule. The next one is a comment from Rory Fitzpatrick. FYI that NCSI will be rolling out in October a year-long examination of issues associated with the intersection of disability, race, and special education, and hopefully will be instructive and useful towards the equity issue raised by a prior state. Thanks, Rory. And thank you to Rory. The next question is, will you still be doing monitoring that was interrupted by COVID? That is, for monitoring other than DMS. Will those be rescheduled in the coming year?
Well, so those states that were scheduled for monitoring in this last year, and we decided to forego the monitoring due to the pandemic, we are attempting to get them within the first couple of cohorts to the extent possible, as we look at balance out the B and C issues there. So you'll see that when the first two cohorts come out.
Thank you. Will the new approach to identifying states for monitoring change the way current states are listed as meets requirements, needs assistance, etc.?
So the determinations is the department is required by the statute, by IDA, to issue determinations every year based on the annual performance reports and additional information. So that process is going to continue as it has, with the changes that we're continuing to do through the rethink, but certainly the information is considered as part of the monitoring process.
And I'm aware of time, so this will be our last question, but for the remaining questions, we'll try to address them in FAQs or as follow-up. But the final question for today is, how are SCA determinations factored into DMS 2.0?
Well, again, we're not using any type of risk basis, which you might think about determinations as a way of figuring out who we're monitoring at a given time. We will certainly consider the determinations as part of the discussion around the state, but what we really want to do is what lies behind that. So a state that is consistently meets requirements over the years, what are they doing right that is helping them meet requirements? And is there anything else that they need to be considering at the same time? So I think that is where we're going to leave it, right, Diana?
Yes. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, so I'll close us out. We're at 5 o'clock. I want to, first of all, thank our presenters, Diana, Lori, and Matt, for walking us through this new process. I want to thank the many folks. I think we had close to 350 on this call for your attention today and for asking thought-provoking questions that we certainly will consider as we move forward. If you have more questions, feel free to forward those to me or your state lead or any of us on this call, and we will take those into consideration as we move forward. So thank you again, and Jennifer, we are going to close out the call.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.